Welcome back to another episode of SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed.
I'm your co-host, Joe.
And this week we're interviewing Mike Finger from Exit Oasis. Mike is 8-time small business owner, 4 successful exits, has failed twice, still co-owns 2, going on 20 years of success. Welcome on the show, Mike.
Gentlemen, a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Great to have you.
So, would you add anything to that intro that I gave? Anything else that people out there in the audience should know?
We haven't gone on and on about the painful way I learned most of the lessons I've learned in this space, but I suspect we'll get to some of that.
We might already be there.
I don't inject that into the introduction.
Sure. No, I definitely look forward to talking about those lessons that you paid your blood for, your sweat and tears for, so that other people can learn from those. I think that'll be really awesome for the audience. Why don't we start off by learning more about what you're up to very specifically today so people can get to know you better?
Sure. I coach small business owners who are interested in preparing their business for sale. That's what I do through Exit Oasis. That's my day job. After the journey I walked, I found myself really engaged by this space, but decided I was ready to be done as the lay in bed awake at 3 a.m. owner. I tend to carry ownership pretty heavy, and so this is an opportunity that allows me to do things that I love to do and still fall asleep at night. So that's good. That's a good thing.
I love to hear that. So you're able to bring your previous experience as an operator and from exiting yourself into giving other people advice when they sell their business. Now, what areas of the market do you work in currently? Is it low, mid-market? What exactly?
Is there a low category? I work primarily with small business owners. So right now, my largest business is going to do about 40 million this year. My smallest will do 500,000. Most of my clients are in that 5 to 15 range by design. That's the space that I have the most experience, I'm most comfortable with, and where we see the biggest impact.
Okay. No, that's very helpful for people to know. And is there any part of the U.S. you just exclusively work in? Do you work nationwide?
Yeah, I've been nationwide, coast to coast. So most of my clients are online in terms of most of our interaction. So geography hasn't been a constraint. And just to clarify, I'm a prep for sale guy. I don't care if the owner sells their business, and neither does the owner, because the truth of this space is that ownability is sellability. It's pretty common for me to talk with an owner the first time because they're miserable, right? There's elements of the business that are eating them alive, and they might come to the table and say, I want to get out of here. How do I do that? But as the business changes, as it becomes sellable, it's not uncommon for owners to fall back in love with their business. So ultimately, what we're looking for is a business that we can keep forever or sell tomorrow. That's the place of freedom, right? That's ultimately the goal of ownership.
I love that. And we often talk about that subject. I want to throw the mic over to Omeed to engage and ask some questions, but I have one more quick one. When would people normally reach out to you if they're maybe a little burnt out from their business, if they're considering selling? When do you usually see people reach out to you?
It varies. There's usually a pain element involved. But I sometimes will get the call from somebody who's just executing a very clear plan, right? I'm 3 to 5 years out from my exit. I know I got to start getting my ducks in a row. How do we do that? But in most cases, we're dealing with owners who have walked the walk that many of us have. We've grown the business. We've gotten to a point of, I don't want to say frustration. We've gotten to a point where the business isn't giving us what we think it needs to anymore. And that desire for exit, whether that come through a sale or from more absentee ownership or whatever that structure might look like, it's about creating the circumstance that allows for that freedom to take place.
That makes a lot of sense. I hear you there. Omeed, I'll toss it.
Awesome. Yeah, Mike, so I hear that you work with small businesses. Can you give us a little more color there, in terms of the types of businesses and so on and so forth?
I've got folks that are in manufacturing, service, software, really a wide variety of industries. And the reason for that is I find that the work that I'm doing and the approach that I'm taking is somewhat industry agnostic. I'll explain it by asking you both a question. Can you give me the eat, write, and exercise of M&A? Can you give me the basic approach to selling a business that empowers a small business owner to actually do something about it? I mean, we work in an industry defined by complication, right? Most professionals in this industry are compensated because of their mastery of the complexity. Accountants, attorneys, brokers, these are folks that know what page or what box to check on page 27. And that's great because that's really important stuff. But the truth is that doesn't empower an owner to be able to make changes in their business to make it more sellable. We all know that.
I do hear
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I do hear what you're saying. Please definitely continue, that we can definitely vibe off of you regarding that subject.
My biggest frustration in this space personally was that I thought I knew what I was doing in my first business, grew it from scratch, got to 50 full-time employees, decided I was ready to exit, and had my moment of, I'm sorry, we can't sell this business for you. Too owner dependent, not enough cash flow, all the regular normal diagnoses. But I thought I had done my homework. I thought I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but the complexity of this industry, I think, overwhelms most owners. And so for me and the clients we work with, what we're trying to focus on are those basic elements of sellability that an owner can impact day in and day out so that when the time comes that they're ready, they're able to actually sell a business.
Yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear on that subject. And also earlier when you were talking about ownability is sellability, this definitely is that subject. This is something we could spend a moment on now and just talk a little bit from our perspective, your perspective. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same thing. Similarly, Omeed and I had been in either in startups or running our own businesses before. And similarly, during those times, we thought, okay, these are our goals. These are what we need to do. This is what's going to make us happy. The problem there is that what you think is right, sure, but even what you think would make you happy is not necessarily and is highly unlikely to be what would make a buyer happy. And like you've touched on a few points here earlier, that the company's generating reliable cash flow over a few year period. A problem there is sometimes a seller will have just got a big bump on a new product and just have some new increase in revenues just the last several months. And they might say, oh, I can sell it on a 3x multiple on my 7-month trailing average. And it's like,
right?
No, that's not the case at all. That has to be shown over preferably 3 years. Obviously we just did a deal where it was a year and a half, a very rapidly growing new product. But nonetheless, buyers are by and large conservative. The banks they use are conservative. PE guys are conservative. They're not trying to rush into a VC type deal here where it's, I'm proving a new product with a few months revenue, high growth. And so there's that problem there just about, showing your, your last few years of financials, even having you might think that you have your financials done right in your satisfaction as a business owner or your accounts or however you're keeping track of things. But you might learn that what you're quantifying, basically how you're producing your accounts, your financial statements, is not right, or you've been missing something that a buyer would totally necessarily need. And obviously that's very different on a business by business basis, so I'm trying not to get into specifics there. So there's a lot of these little things that come up that a person who's running their own business might think they're doing right, like you said in your example, but aren't necessarily doing it right. And that's definitely where I see your value prop at Exit Oasis come in, where you provide that professional expertise guidance. So I'm doing hand gestures here and I'm Italian, it never gets captured on camera. So for me, it's annoying. And so I can see that that's where your expertise guidance comes in. They might be good at running their business, but it's an entirely different profession to sell your business, to prepare it for sale. Omeed, why don't I let you jump in there too? This is something we often talk about, and I'm sure that you have some stuff.
Totally. Yeah. So to answer your question, what's the eat right and exercise of M&A? My answer would be build with the exit in mind from the very beginning and work with competent advisors.
Okay. Can I challenge you on that, Omeed?
Yeah.
What if I can't afford the advisors?
That's a thing.
What if I'm a small business owner? What if I'm one of the majority of small business owners out there? Okay, and let's frame this a little bit, right? Because when we talk about M&A, when we talk about private equity, we're talking about a very narrow band of small business owners, right? What, 3%? It's really small. And so when we expand out from that, we're talking 95, 96, 97% of small business owners that don't have the capacity to hire advisors, that are going to fail to sell, not because of a technical accounting issue, but because they're not making any money in their business. And yet, when they consume what I refer to lovingly as M&A porn, which is the stuff that we see out there, right? Hey, let me tell you about my $200 million exit after 13 months in business. Isn't this fabulous? You can do it too if you follow these 4 steps. Suddenly, these owners listen to this stuff. They get to the place where they're like, well, I'm ready. I hit this key metric I read about in such and such an article, but they're still not making any money. And they're the only ones that know the engineering of their product, right? It's like the basics have to be there. The basics kill more deals than all of the technicalities combined.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Everything we hear in the ether is about the technicalities.
Yeah, and I'll respond direct. Omeed, you might have a response, but let me jump in there because I had something immediately come to mind. So I hear what you're saying, especially small business owners can't afford real advice. And very often we see in a deal that's $1 to $5 million where they're too budget conservative. For example, a lawyer, they hire a lawyer who doesn't even know M&A. So now they're paying for advisors who don't even know how to advise them. We see a lot of that in the smaller business space too, which is equally a huge problem because they're really going to get their behind handed to them, to say it gently. We've definitely seen it go wrong. And so basically to respond to your question, there's a few different ways people do talk. Okay, I'll talk about what we do, and then I'll talk a little bit what we see other people do. We try to be generally flexible. For example, one thing we do is we try to be considerate of doing contingency fee or a large portion of the payment come at closing so that you're getting the professional advice, but it only comes out at the closing. Obviously, as advisors, we don't really like that because that means now we're taking a risk on the deal when that's normally legal counsel is hourly. So we prefer not to do that, but we definitely we try to be flexible as much as possible for the client. One thing we see people out there in the market talk a lot about, which we don't do, is try to get a real professional advisor you might have a connection with or some type of relationship with and try to offer them some type of equity participation in the business. As attorneys, again, that's not very typical for us. We know that like Kirkland Ellis and big firms, they do a lot of that client lawyer, participate in the same acquisition transaction type stuff. We just don't do that. We've had people offer it to us before and we kind of just shift the conversation to contingency fee. So those are 2 ways that we see it play out in the market. At the end of the day, those aren't hard and fast solutions. I'm not trying to say that those fix everybody's problem. There's a lot of balancing that needs to be done there. It even needs to be considered as a big exercise of, are you going to save up money to prepare to pay for advisors as a small business owner? Because it is that important of a step in the business. I would definitely, however, like to hear what you have to say about that, Mike and Omeed.
Well, gentlemen, if I'm coming to you and you tell me, most of the potential deals that come to you, are those businesses already ready for sale?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'd say at this currently the last 6 months, about 80% of them.
Okay.
We do have the last 2 years, we do have predominantly buyers as clients, so that obviously solves for a significant portion of that because we're not dealing with the seller coming in and realizing that the business is not ready for sale. We do, however, get those, and that usually ends up being we immediately connect them with an accountant to talk to the accountant if their financials aren't in order, or stuff like that. Because as attorneys, we do punt to the accountant quite often. Sure, punting to a broker is another way we take it when we identify that's the case. We kind of treat those clients like we help them with introductions at the beginning to put together what we call a little deal team to help them build out their advisor group to understand what's going on. We very rarely get smaller. Sorry, I keep going on here. Almost finished. We very rarely get small transactions where it's a Wharton MBA grad. We actually think we got one of those like in the last 12 or 18 months. Wharton MBA grad didn't need our advice like to some extent. And try to say is basically small business seller or buyer who, I don't remember if that was seller buyer in that case, but basically just knows so much already that even if they're not prepared or something, they barely need us to help guide them through the thicket. So, yeah.
Mike, I'm curious, in your opinion, what's the eat, write, and exercise of M&A?
There's the soft pitch, Omeed. I was counting on it. I tell you what, when I first sat down to do this, I can remember I had just sold a business. My wife and I were on a plane ride somewhere, and I had my journal out, and I was writing down some questions. And one of the questions I asked myself is what do I want to do next? What do I want to spend time talking about that I'm willing to talk about 1,000 times, right? What's something I'm passionate enough about? Led me to to this space. And the more I thought about this space, I found myself asking, how do you sell medicine to people who don't know they're sick, right? Because the biggest problem we face in this space is small business owners who assume that an exit is part of their journey. And if I assume that I'm going to be able to sell my business when I decide I'm ready to, this isn't a topic I spend any time on. Right? Until I get to that place, like I said, I did. I'm a decade into ownership, and I'm ready to do something else. And that's when I learned it wasn't ready. So I dive into this topic, and I found myself whittling. Right? I kept looking at topic areas. Here's a 73-point list of due diligence questions. Right? And it's like, well, that's important, but it's not critical. Right? And that's important, but so. To get long answer to your question, I landed on 3 basic questions. Here's what they are. Are my results desirable? Can a buyer duplicate my results? And can I document my results?
Okay.
If you as a small business owner can answer yes to those 3 simple questions, you are well on your way to having a sellable business. Chances are you have. If you got a no on any of those questions, you know what you need to spend time on before you ever talk to the broker, before you engage this process, before you start thinking transaction. If I don't have desirable results, right? If I'm not producing any cash flow, if this is a losing venture, if I'm working 18 hours as the owner with people I don't like in a crappy environment, those are not desirable results. And I should not assume that I'm going to be able to turn around and sell that business. So for me, it broke down to those 3 simple questions because from my perspective, that puts small business owners in a position where they can focus on changing their business in a way that will dramatically improve their ability to sell it someday.
I do really like the simplicity with which you explain those 3 things and how I can see in my head, at least, in a narrow part here initially, how they're interconnected with a lot of the things, like, for example, okay, is stuff documented? In other words, do you have your financials in order? Do you have SOPs? Probably pretty sure that's where you're going and among other directions. So I do very much so like that. What's your immediate, since you were talking about it, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, Mike. So I hear, those are kind of the 3 facets of the eat right and exercise for health kind of simple playbook. But to pose the question that you asked to me back to you, if a business owner doesn't have the resources to dial in any of those 3 aspects, what would you suggest that they do? Now, I have an answer. I'm curious what yours would be.
Well, I mean, the question leads this way for me. If I don't have desirable results, I know I'm not in the sell a business space, right? So now we're talking about how do I change the business? And again, is that a big question for some business? It's huge. My industry is in turmoil. There's huge price pressure. how in the world do I create profitability in this business? That's a massive question. And I wouldn't suggest that I know the answer to that question for all businesses. But if we start with that question instead of what's the metric that I should have about user base on my software package before I go to market, right? Is that important? Yeah, that's important. For some buyers, it's critically important. However, I listened to one of your episodes and we've got a buyer who's saying very clearly, well, we only buy profitable businesses. Right? We only buy profitable SaaS operations. Okay, well, we don't have to worry about the other metrics. We go back, we start with those basics. So to answer your question, is it a simple question? It is. Is it an easy one to answer? Not necessarily. Are my results desirable? No. Okay, what do I need to do to change that? That's the journey that we start down when I'm working with a
totally makes sense, because my answer was I'm a mindset guy, right? So I love mindset. So you pose the question of, okay, most small business owners are getting crushed under their business. That's usually why they want to sell. That's often why they want to sell. They're burnt out. They're getting crushed. The money's not there. The business is causing them some sort of pain that is driving them to want to sell business. Obviously, there are many other reasons why people sell, but that often can be one. If that's the case and they don't have money to hire an advisor, oftentimes those business owners themselves are stuck. So we've had some people that, have come to us that have been in that situation. And my answer always is, you have to, find a way to either go out there and offer equity to someone who can fix your business, maybe generate more sales, for example, or you have to find a new passion.
Sure.
For the business, because what's happening right now is oftentimes those business owners are stuck and they're not taking action. They're only continuing to do what they have done from the beginning of time, which has netted them the same results over and over again, or they've gotten to a certain place where they're only taking the same actions, and now they're kind of stuck in a riptide of not being able to get out of that place. But if they go into, for example, like an inquisitive mindset, for example, how can I fix this problem? Okay, I don't have the money, but what resources can I look to that will at least give me a direction that I can go on to at least start to adjust some aspects of the problem so that I can free up some resources so that I can hire an advisor, right? So
100% plus, Omeed, as you just pointed out, I now know the problem I'm trying to solve. It's not some perception of some mystical formula out there that determines my valuation that has nothing to do with profitability, or has nothing to do with the fact that if I'm the engineer who made this and I'm the only guy that has a clue how it works, that's a problem, right? Those results aren't duplicatable by another buyer. So those are the kind of things. Understanding the problem is pretty important to start.
Yeah, what do they say? A well-defined problem is half solved, I think is the quote, as it's said by them.
Yep.
That's a good quote. Well, I do want to call out something. I'll challenge both of you right now. I love where this is going. I'm totally on board with this. We still haven't answered the question yet, though. I guess, Omeed, you did a little bit there. Okay, try to, free up some cash to pay for an advisor, use some equity. There's still, in my head, it's kind of like a lot of these people, if they already knew a marketing guru who could fix their business, they would have already talked to him. I don't know. There's a bit that isn't just the deal package for how they can bring in some fancy advisor to solve their problems. It's a bit more complex than that. And I want to challenge that back to you guys, both of you, as to, well, what do people do in that situation if they can't afford an advisor or if they can't get one?
The interesting thing for me, Joe, to respond, is that I'm a huge believer in small business owners. I'm a huge believer in their ability to get things done once they recognize the thing is actually on their agenda. So when you ask the question, how do they fix their business? I would suggest to you that most of them, when it comes to the sellability question, don't have a freaking clue it's broken, right? And so if I'm suddenly made aware that I'm not on the path that I'm on, that I thought I was on, right? I thought I was heading towards this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And suddenly I discover that that pot of gold's only there if I've been taking gold all the way along through that journey, right? There's not some grand payout, but rather I need to have built something that is producing good results along the way. Now I have a different target. Now I have at least clarity about what the problem is that I need to solve. And what I generally find with owners is once they know that, I have to run to catch up to them. It's not about them needing to be led point by point to where, but to be able to say, listen, if we don't hit X, we can't produce Y. How do we hit X? More often than not, they've got 7 options to consider once they know that it's a problem to be solved. I don't know how that strikes.
No. I just like how you're looking at it and how you're talking about it there is just very much so the natural progression of asking those initial questions as part of your approach. No, that makes a lot of sense. I do see that. I like that. It goes again back to the trust of a small business owner. There is definitely an aspect there I'll say from my point of view, I obviously have love, trust, and respect for small business owners, taking care of their families, controlling their own, I'll say destiny. That's not what I meant. Just kind of controlling their own life. On the other hand, there's definitely a lot of cases where people aren't prepared to make those decisions. And I'm not trying to put a percentage here or to fix those problems. And that might be indicative as to why they're in that problem in the first place. I'm not one of those guys that thinks having an MBA solves all your problems. I don't have an MBA. I have a lot of MBA friends, so it's hard for me to make fun of them. But
make fun of them, Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where people think, well, if you just had an MBA or this or that, you wouldn't have these problems, but that's not true at all. There is a lot of knowledge, behavior, awareness that is required to run your own business, as you alluded to from discussing initially here about your own personal experience, that you're a type of person. And I'm actually the same type of person where the responsibility of running a business is very heavy on my shoulders because I take it very seriously. And so there's so many things that small business owners do face. Very often, not all the times, they can be in a highly competitive environment, fighting it out against, copycat products from China. Also, fighting out Google AdWords prices. There's all sorts of ways that a small business owner can have a lot of heavy problems. So I guess I'm trying to not contradict what you're saying, but kind of just counter back with, I have faith in small business owners too, but it's not always the case that they can solve their problem or have the ability to do so. Just being a little...
Agreed, Joe. And that's why most small businesses will eventually fail. Right? By the numbers, we know most businesses shut down without a sale. That is the journey most owners are on. The problem we're calling out here is that most owners don't know that's the journey they're on. I've seen studies that have shown that in the mid-70% of small business owners believe they will sell their business to help fund their retirement. Best numbers I see, less than 20% of small business owners will ever sell successfully. That painful gap is what what I'm talking about. I can't promise that an owner being aware of the problem means they're going to be able to fix it, but I guarantee that being aware of the problem dramatically increases the odds of being able to fix it.
I like that. No, it all makes very much so sense to me. And even if they think to themselves, okay, here's a problem, I have some solutions, they could then go talk to an expert and soundboard those solutions off. The expert might say, no, that's not the fix. This is the fix. And there's a lot of ways that process can go once, like you've said, some initial questions are asked and the issues are, as lawyers say, the issues are identified. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Omeed, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, it's the kind of 2 functions of the eat right and exercise, like health advice. The first one that I said is build with the exit in mind. Does it matter? I would imagine that it matters where in the stage a business owner realizes that they don't know what the process of selling a business is. Would you say that's accurate in terms of, realizing that you can't sell your business at the time that you want to sell your business? Probably isn't as good as realizing that you can't sell your business, well before you want to sell it. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I understanding the elements of sellability, and let's make I don't know if I'm parsing here, but I don't really care about the transaction. I know you guys live in that transaction space, and it's a really important part of selling your business, right? The business doesn't sell without it. But I'm a firm believer that the sale of a business happens or fails to happen way before the transaction takes place. The question is have I built a sellable business? Right? If I have a sellable business and I talk to the attorneys or I go fishing for a broker, there's really smart people out there like yourselves that are going to take care of that stuff for me. And so I guess where I would push to and where those questions are designed to push to is, am I building a business that I could sell if I wanted to? And then let's start talking about the transaction. Is that distinction of value?
Yeah, I want to emphasize... Omeed, real quick, I just want to emphasize what you said there about, we're a process people. The transaction is a very market standard process. We expect the seller to hand it off to us to handle it. There's stuff that they will obviously be interested in being involved in, but it's not like fixing a big problem or something. It's very much so like lawyers come in, we do our process, and we succeed over the line. That's it. We're not saving anybody's business. We're not like coming up with unique solutions unless it's required to make a transaction go through, but that's not that common. Omeed, cool.
I actually had a side note question. Do you think all the M&A porn is going to decrease the amount of businesses that don't sell because now it's such a hot topic to sell your business? A lot more people are going to start thinking about it. And say that's a prediction of yours or no?
Oh, I can go optimistic or pessimistic here. Let me do both. Optimistic, it's easier for someone who's sincerely looking for information to find it around this topic than it used to be. That's the optimistic. The pessimistic is it's way, way easier for someone looking for information about this topic to find bad information about this topic than it used to be. And again, here you're talking to a guy, and I'm always a little embarrassed to tell this story, but a couple of years before I reached my I want to sell moment, I read an article that said a business in my industry, and I'm using that loosely because I kind of carved and shoved my business into this industry of the article I was reading, would sell for 2 times revenue.
I knew you were going to say this. I knew you were going to say it was
That's what the article said. So what did I chase for the next 3 years? I chased revenue. And I did it successfully. And it had absolutely nothing to do with selling my business. Bad information. Should I have known better? Probably, right? I'm sure the right information was out there. But for owners that are out there looking, we're in a niche environment, right? So owners who are out there looking to learn about X industry, and they go to that industry and they hear these experts, and I've heard it in your space, in the SaaS space, where we've got these folks doing roll-ups, and they'll proudly come on a podcast and they'll talk about the 7 factors that they look for when they buy a business, right? And they have these very clear metrics that they look for when they buy a business. And that buyer is only going to buy a small number of businesses. And usually those metrics have nothing to do with what's going to make that business more sellable to the general market. And so it's like, if I'm an owner and I hear that stuff and I actually believe it and I chase that. So where am I at? Positive, negative? Omeed, I don't know. You tell me. Is the prevalence of M&A porn going to improve the market, or is it going to make it worse?
I'm an optimist. Joe knows this. So I'm going to, I'm going to put my coin in it's going to help a lot of business owners, because that's the whole mission of this podcast anyway, right? So it's kind of an acknowledgement. It's a complex process, so on and so forth. And so, whatever we can do to bring transparency to it. And there's so many other people like us as well. So yeah, I'm going to cast my vote in terms of
I hope you're right. One quick note. Again, going back to our conversation about the makeup of the audience, right? If 3% of the audience are in that PE space, it's probably, I think that number is probably smaller than that, but let's say hypothetically, it means that most of the audience that's listening to a conversation about how private equity purchases isn't actually learning something that can help them. In fact, they're probably learning things that will distort their perception. Hey, PE multiples are usually in the 5 to 8 range. Well, guess what? That's not what the 97% are going to experience when they go to try to sell their business. So it's a tricky one for me. Joe, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh, no. I really like the way we're doing this conversation back and forth very naturally. That's kind of the way I like to do this. So no problem at all. I want to take it. I have a little bit of a different response, and I wouldn't say this is being pessimistic. I'd say this is just how I see it as a guy who worked in M&A right out of law school at big firms. And so I come from like a brain surgeon perspective to M&A, as opposed to, okay, first time reading online about how to buy or sell a business. So the exact opposite world. And this is my perspective. It's just like WebMD. Omeed and I like to tell people, it's one of our pithy one-liners that's hilarious. We like to tell people, when you're buying or selling a business, that is not the time to get your Google Law degree. And it's similar as to the non-legal aspects of the transaction also. So it's a tough one. Like, if I was entering into a new field of expertise, I would read like a dozen books on the subject. I probably wouldn't read much internet content. But in the M&A space, I have dozens of M&A books, and they're not all that good, actually. I mean, they're not bad, but again, they tend to have like one investment banker's experience, right, which may not be applicable to other people or other industries that he hasn't experienced, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I'm trying to get at there is there's not very good materials out there, going off your example about the 2x revenue. By the way, was the correct answer like a 3x EBITDA multiple? What was the actual answer?
That's right? That's what we know from real world experience. And it's funny, I was on a call with a new client just yesterday, and we did the math. This business sold for 1 times revenue, but it also sold for 2.5 times seller's discretionary earnings, which, oh, by the way, happens to be the national average for small business sale multiple of seller's discretionary earnings. So it's like, which number do we use? Is the rule 1 times revenue? No, the rule is 2.5 times sellers, right? So the math can be funny.
Gosh, no, it can be. But okay, I when you had said that, it piqued my interest, and I wanted to see what the answer was to that. In any event, so that's my response to that subject. Is it's tough, and I think that the way you raise the subject is very important to again call out. It's because there's so much attention-catching, let's say, like thirst for money, incentivizing content out there that makes people want to go read and builds up their appetite, makes them want to go do something, that those people then go and read a lot of this content and may or may not find themselves, not fully understanding what they need to know or the profession. That's really how I see it. Over time, is that going to get better? I think it'll probably get better over time. There's more and more content out there. We know of several. I mean, we speak at several organizations that help first-time business buyers through the process. We've heard from other like people in the business kind of comment, well, those guys say this and it's wrong, and there's a lot of that back and forth. Generally, I'm not trying to say that those people are wrong. We work with them, and I'll give them a 99% striking average. They're pretty good at what they do. What I'm trying to say is, yeah, people do say some stuff wrong. It can be tough if you haven't like rolled a bowling ball 1,000 times and you've talked about it, you've read a couple blogs about it, you're not going to be able to roll a 200. You're not going to be able to roll a 100. So
I agree. But again, my question about that would be, most of what we're talking about there is transactional, right? When I pull that M&A book off the shelf, I'm reading about transactions. I'm not necessarily reading about what do I need to do to create sellability in my small business before the transaction ever takes place, before any of that knowledge starts to come into play. Omeed, do you see it on the buy side as well? You guys said earlier you deal mostly with buyers.
Do we see which aspect?
Go ahead. The knowledge deficit the M&A porn element?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. 100%. I mean, I think that is a great deal of kind of rush that we're seeing is, based on the premise of, the baby boomers are retiring. It's like kind of seen as the gold rush of our generation.
There is a question, is there really a silver tsunami coming? Because I've been hearing about it for about 25 years now.
Yeah, I mean, that...
My neck hurts, so I'm having trouble laughing, but I want to laugh louder.
That's the big... That for sure is the big question. I mean, it sure sounds catchy, right? So it's a great premise to sell a program. It's a great premise to create a movement. It's a great premise to drive that kind of wealth craze. I think you've posted about this too, and I've posted about it as well. That was originally what made me reach out to you is like, yeah, we're seeing this craze, but we're not really seeing people tell people about the dangers of the craze as well. And so I think that was one of the things that I really appreciated. Yeah,
we do
that we're very cognizant of doing.
We do that.
To know that completely passive income is a myth, in terms of like put $1 in and you get $10 out and you don't have to do absolutely anything other than just like stick it in the box and that's it. If that's what you're chasing, you're most likely going to be disappointed. And yes, the M&A porn for sure is squarely kind of speaking to that aspect of things. So
yeah, if I go out, I go out and I chase a purchase, I haven't done anything to change the odds about profitability in small businesses, right? Most of the herd is unhealthy when it comes to this. Right? Most small businesses out there are not creating desirable results, right? They're not creating results that are worth buying. So why would
Which is
go
ahead, Jeff.
Omeed, I want to throw a few comments out. Go ahead with what you're going to say, but I want to comment on some things that you were saying.
Yeah, I was just going to say, which also creates the opportunity, right? So it's that lack of desirability that creates the opportunity itself for the buyer to come in and purchase, and potentially, if they're willing to, put the work in and so on and so forth and build the business, in a lot of ways, that's where people really can succeed if they're willing to, make the necessary adjustments to the business and they know how to rework those aspects of the business that make it a desirable business. But the lack of desirability of the business is what drives the opportunity itself, which is really an interesting kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
But
yeah. But now I better be a turnaround knowledgeable expert.
Oh no.
Not just a guy who's going to buy a business because I was taught in this class that it's better to buy than it is to
Which
sell.
is the turnaround aspect is definitely less sexy for sure.
Yeah.
The turnaround aspect is I'll kind of start throwing out my
Go for it, Joe.
Oh my gosh, when I hear people talk about turning around, it's like only the smartest people I've ever met are turnaround experts. It's like when you buy a business that's broken, it might be because the business has really severe problems that another smart person couldn't solve over years. And so there's definitely a bit of hubris in there too, but I know some turnaround experts who are stellar, and I mean, they'll do an analysis beforehand anyways, but that's an elite of the elite category of M&A and buying businesses and PE. It's definitely not something I would ever recommend a first-time business buyer to even consider, first of all. And going on to Omeed, what you were talking about with our clients, the buyers, a lot of first-time buyers, that's for sure. A lot of first-time buyers who participate in these type of organizations and consume a lot of digital content regarding M&A. That's right. They usually have other expertises like marketing or sales or operations, other professions that they've had before, and they want to take a new step in their business life. Maybe they're an executive, or maybe they have a really good role and now they want to become a business owner, and this is the path they've chosen, or they've been caught on the internet, they've read about it. I want to be very clear that these people are by no means incapable. They are capable people. What we like to do with our clients is we're pretty straight shooters. So if we think something's going wrong or they don't know what's going on, we'll tell them straight up. But other thing we do with our clients is I'm not trying to give a spiel on how, on how we run the firm, but I'm just trying to add some color to this subject to make it clear, because I felt like it was an important subject passed off too shortly. And, the second thing I was saying is that, so we take on the responsibility of walking them through the transaction. And as an attorney, you take on a lot of responsibility legally and otherwise for the success, again, of a transaction, not the the pre-transaction prep stuff. And so what we do is, if it's a first-time buyer, that's particularly why we want them to work with us and not some generalist corporate practitioner who doesn't know M&A, because we really do everything we can, all the best practices we can, to make sure we're protecting them. We ask them difficult due diligence questions that even are outside of legal to make sure that the business is bankable. And we definitely uncover stuff for our clients and save their ass all the time. There's this one business that had a license in 3 of 30 counties it was operating in. And I was like, you're not buying that. So the client, I was like, you're not buying this business. It was hilarious. It turned out their financials were totally wrong too, which he ended the deal so quickly, I didn't get to take apart that puzzle because it's was that fraud or I don't know what that was. So yeah, that's a little more color as to what we see and how we deal with it. I think it's going to be inevitable that there's going to be first-time buyers out there. I mean, those are the people buying a lot of these smaller businesses. I mean, it's a really interesting subject. I think it deals a lot. It needs a lot of attention. And by no means when I kind of make fun of M&A porn, and do I mean to deride in any way first-time buyers and the knowledge they're trying to partake of on the internet. It's just kind of where it is. Maybe we have an M&A chat GPT advisor that's a piece of crap right now. It's like alpha. We're trying to work with chat GPT and make our own little M&A advisor thing. It's 5 to 10 years out. But maybe what I'm trying to get at there is in 10 years, small business buyers might just be able to ask a robot what's wrong with their business or what they're doing wrong. I don't know, maybe 20 years. Maybe that's 20 years out.
To me, Joe, it's never about discouraging or disparaging the buyer, right? What we're talking about is do it, but do it with your eyes wide open.
That's what we're about to.
Don't do it based on right? Don't do it with some mistaken presupposition that everybody who buys a business is going to find easy success, because you're about to get a really painful lesson in reality after, if that's what you go in believing. And the same thing with the sellers. None of this is designed, and I get accused sometimes of being discouraging, and that is not my intention at all. I want to talk about the tough stuff so we can get into the good stuff, right? And the tough stuff is, this is a tough space. Selling a business is a low percentage win, but you can make it better if you start now, stop waiting, don't assume that this is going to be an easy journey, and start making changes to your business that result in a different outcome. That, to me, is what this is about. Eyes wide open.
Love it. Same.
100%. I'm exactly there with you on that.
Let's talk about your 4 exits, Mike. Let's talk about your 4 exits, and then let's transition into the conversation into digging more into your process of working with your clients and, Go ahead, Joe.
No, finish up and I want to add something.
That was it.
Okay, I was going to say, let's be cognizant of the time also. We got 25 minutes left. So as we touch on these subjects, maybe we could just...
I was thinking...
Yeah, I'll be brief on the exits, because honestly, I don't think they're that exciting for certainly for your audience. My business experience has been primarily in more general business operations. My first business was industry called association management. We built a back office where we managed small associations and nonprofits. Started a sister company that did similar work for schools, financial management, accounting, and the like. As I mentioned earlier, grew those 2 businesses up to 50 full-time employees, got the 2x4 hit in the head that my business wasn't sellable, went back to the trenches for 5 years, changed the business, learned some of the things that we've been talking about here very painfully. And but then successfully sold in 2010 those operations. Afterwards, I played with a startup for a while. When it got to the point of writing the big check, I said, maybe we shouldn't do this. I worked as a business broker for a year, helping others buy and sell businesses. Loved part of that, hated part of that. Spent 3 years working as the director of incubator in my region, where we helped startup and growth companies start up and grow faster. Missed the ownership piece. went back and bought and sold and subsequently, or bought, turned around and sold 2 small businesses, and then landed in the space where I am now with Exit Oasis. So I've been lucky enough to be a buyer, a seller, a broker, and that has really, really informed my experience in this space and why I approach this the way I do with owners. It's, again, I won't beat a dead horse. The complexity in this space is discouraging for so many owners that they focus in on assumptions. I hear the story from the owner who says, well, I'm going to sell my business this way because their brother-in-law happens to be in M&A and told them about a deal structure. So they apply that to their situation. And then I explain to them, well, that was a SaaS company with intellectual property, 100 employees, and X, Y, and Z, and you own a small restaurant. So they're going to be different deals, right? It's not going to work the same way. But if you don't know what you don't know. And so let's stop and take a breath and stop babbling there, Omeed. I don't know if that gave you what you were looking for.
Yeah, I think that was a great overview and kind of a great segue to, let's really dig into process of how you work with your clients, maybe some stories, that exemplify, some key concepts. Walk us through the process. I heard the 3 primary questions. Is there anything else that we need to know inside of those, or?
Yeah, I mean, we really start with a walkthrough. I spend half my time in the initial meeting, half my time in the business, and half my time in the owner's head. Because ultimately, if we want to talk about selling a business, it's those 2 spaces that have to come together, right? What I want for the business, the exit value I'm seeking, needs to be what a realistic evaluation of that business in the real world would produce, right? So it's like, okay, if I want a $10 million exit, what does my business need to look like using some basic realistic assumptions about how a business gets valued and sold? What does the business need to look like, right? What kind of profitability do I need? What does that imply in terms of size? All right, so we've got that picture out there. And then we reverse engineer down to where we are. Right? If we're here and we need to be here, that's the journey that we start to walk. And so it's about finding the low-hanging fruit to start making those changes. But again, the biggest value that I try to provide is a modification of the owner's perspective. I'll give you a simple example. If I approach my year end and the goal is reducing my tax liability, that's a very different journey than if I approach my year end and my goal is to maximize my profitability for sellability. I'm doing the same thing. I'm working through the same process, but I'm doing it with a very different goal in mind. And so it's about helping the owner change their perspective about what the goal is and where we want to get to. And again, that is the most rewarding part of what I do, is watching owners change their relationship with their business back to a place where it is giving them what they want and need, not where they're focused on feeding and caring for this monster that they've created that's now trying to eat them.
Love that. No, that's wonderful. And I'm totally seeing your process there too. I definitely have we have more time still. I definitely would like to get more into that, but Omeed, you're kind of directing the line of questions.
Yeah, and Joe, if you have any questions, feel free to pepper them in as well. But okay, so what are some of the common challenges that you see with owners in terms of, that mindset and getting to profitability? I feel like business owners themselves probably want profitability. They don't know how to get there, but speak a little to that. I would love to kind of hear about, both challenges as well as what are the actual kind of tangible things that you've seen across the board that really help with that profitability, for example.
It's a great question. Let's start with a real basic one. Profit is what actually survives my best intentions and hits my tax returns at the end of the year. It's not, I invested all my profit back into the business, right? We've been very profitable, but I've invested all those profits back in the business. That translates to a buyer looking at your financials and not seeing any profitability, right? So part of it, I think what we're talking about there, Omeed, is helping somebody address their inner growth junkie and recognize that if we're building this machine to produce a certain result, it has to actually do that. So again, that's a change in perspective for a lot of owners. New ideas, expansion opportunities. I want to improve this. I want to fix that. And it's great, except that and I'm thinking of one or two particular owners right now where they almost had to go into stasis for a period of time in order to let the good ideas and what they've done gestate enough to actually start to produce the profit that they were going to need it to do, right? Instead of reinvesting and then doing the next thing and doing the next thing. So part of it is about that perspective on the business and what the profit outcome actually is. A huge part of it is about team building, right? These owners we as owners, we build our business. It depends on us, especially in the early startup stage, but figuring out how to transition away from that to a place where the results that are created aren't dependent on me, right? If it's all up to you, why would I buy your business? You're walking out the door. And so that's a huge part of where we spend time. It's a huge challenge for a lot of owners figuring out how to give that responsibility away and start to build others to do the things that they've been responsible for themselves. So I would say those two areas, the change about perspective on profit and that team building are massive. We talk systems, we talk documentation, we talk all of those things, but if I had to pick two, those are probably the two where we spend the most time and energy.
Joe, you have anything you want to add in?
Sure, I can just kind of keep going off that. That makes a lot of sense. We like to do stories as much as we had such good content so far on this podcast. Normally earlier on, we're at the very beginning, we're usually like jump straight to stories, tell us some real life stories.
Sure.
Name names or anything. That's not the
of course
about the lessons. So why don't you tell us a story about a business where they had X issue, they ended up doing Y, it took them this much amount of time, and that led them to be able to sell for X, or, I'm not trying to tell you what to say, but...
Yeah. Let's see if I can call out a specific. Working with a client, it owns a manufacturing company who has been undergoing a focused effort to extract himself from the business. He wants to continue to grow the business. He wants to do it through acquisition, but he's been so intricately involved in the business, in the day-to-day for so long. So going through that process of building the team and then creating some very practical ways for him to stop doing. And when I talk about practical, we can talk about it in concept, but I'll tell my own story. I did that. I had to do that to myself. When I came to the realization that business was too dependent on me, I hired people, right? I had I had two different operations. I hired someone to run each of those operations. The problem is that I couldn't be in the room and not be the guy. And so what I ended up doing is buying a small building 50 miles away from my business that was closer to home, and that's where I would go to work every day. And I had to essentially exile myself from my business because that was a practical way that I could keep from being the guy in the room where the team would work together, they'd make a decision, and then they'd all stop and they'd look at me, right? And I would suck the independence right out of the group. So I've got an owner that stopped going to work on Fridays to help accomplish some of the same things. I've had owners that where we look for practical, pragmatic ways for them to create the change that they've struggled to create. And it often, like I said, it often comes from those simple changes in how we deal with the business. I don't know if that speaks to what you guys are going.
It does. No, that's a common thing. You can't buy the seller with the business unless you're buying the seller with the business.
Yeah.
Unless somehow that's part of the deal structure, which is typically not what the sellers want. It's such a just to kind of respond a little bit there. It's such a funny concept because to be the person who runs your own business, you have to be the guy in the room. But to be the person who sells a business, you have to not be the guy in the room. So I know it can be different. It's different scenarios, but it's just kind of a funny thing, kind of builds your behaviors and attitudes over time. You kind of think that you need to be thinking of the solutions because it's your business, but in reality, you need to build a team who can think of the solutions and, hopefully all you're contributing is something that can be replaced by another buyer. And so, yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear there. I want to point this in the direction of a horror story. Oh, do you have any other questions where we're at? Because now I want to ask for a story about, you don't. Okay. Can you tell us an example of, there was this really big problem that happened, and it could be a story that wasn't fixed at the time, but that you learned something from that other people could learn from, or it could be something really bad was going on with the business that did get fixed at the time. We call those horror stories.
The hardest ones for me are the situations where it's clear that the owner is the cause of the problem, but they have an inability to accept and recognize and address that reality. I'm thinking in particular of an owner who was trying to build a leadership team and made the hires and turned over those positions. And to sit down with that person and say, after they've tried it 6 times, what's the common variable in all of these? It's you.
It's tough.
Right? You're the one who hired them. You're the one who trained them. You're the one who managed them, and none of them lasted 6 months. So how many more of these do we need to do before we accept that that's the problem? And in the case I'm thinking of, he wasn't able to get there. He wasn't able to get to that place because that's where the rage mantra comes in. No one works as hard as I do. No one understands this industry as well as I do. And time after time creates that self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's why I said earlier, half of this is about what's going on in the business. Half of this is about what's going on in the owner's head. The redeeming factor here is that I get to work in a space with owners who are massively motivated, right? Because often when I'm having a conversation with them, it's because they want something to change. I want to sell my business. I need this to change. And I find that most of them are way more open to making significant changes than they normally are, just given the motivation behind what we're doing. And again, it's great to be on that wave, right? Because like I said before, once we start talking about it, once we start doing it, I often have to play catch up with the owners because they see it, they go for it. That's the kind of people that they are. So
yeah, that's a really tough story. And I can understand too, it kind of goes back, at least from my perspective, a little to what I was saying earlier about, as some people, when they do build a business, they have to build up that ego, or maybe that's part of their thick skin is, no, I know what I'm talking about. And that's what helps get them along the way.
Yeah.
But at some point in time, another person has to be in the room that knows what they're talking about. And I don't know the specific dynamics of what occurred there in those 6 teams. I could definitely imagine, probably with some accuracy. And it's very tough. And it's tough. It's sad to see that from our perspectives as advisors, seeing a business owner going through that, and especially if they're not able to solve for it. But that is inevitable in many circumstances. Everybody can't be enlightened or fully self-aware or able to change their behaviors, especially later in life. That's not something that everybody can be asked of or expected to do. So
I think the cruelest part is that for most startups, for most small businesses, we're required to be that guy through that startup stage, right? Unless we've got fat bank accounts, we're doing the 18-hour days. It's about us. We've got to be the answer. And so we go through this phase where it is about us, and we grow to a place where it can't be about us. That's a difficult transition.
That's a difficult transition. It is changing roles so much so that it's understandable that a lot of people, it's a very common issue, not the issue of people not being able to change, but the issue of people having to change,
right,
is so common. And I also look at it similarly to, it was on the tip of my tongue. I was going to say I forgot. I was going to say it's similar to another circumstance where people need to change the life cycle of a business. So yeah, it's a big problem. Omeed.
Yeah, and I would imagine what needed to change in that story was oftentimes, in that dynamic, those people are like micromanagers. That's why leadership doesn't stay, is that Is that accurate?
I think that's fair. In the particular case, I'm thinking of just an unwillingness to let go, right? Yeah, that element of I can do that better, I can do that faster. You didn't make that decision perfectly. Just again, the dynamic that gets created after years and years of all elements pointing to you and wanting to get to that place where they don't. But yeah, that tendency to micromanage, that tendency to repeat past practice, it's hard. It is a fundamental change that needs to take place about how we view the business and our role in it, which of course for small business owners means I have to change the way I view myself, because we identify with the business and what it is, and now we're talking about it being different.
No, definitely. That's such a huge
Yeah, and that, I think, that is much harder than simply just, creating an SOP, for example, like, because an SOP is like it's a tangible document, but, releasing the grip on the person who's following the SOP is like a whole nother journey. That's incredibly difficult. So, Joe, how you doing on time?
Yeah, I was just about to say, even though I'm having such an enjoyable conversation truly here today, why don't we go ahead now and turn us towards the close? Since
Cool. Yeah, let's go ahead and just wrap. And so to wrap, Michael, do you have a message, for all of the small business owners out there that you wish they all knew? What's something that you wish all small business owners knew?
Whenever I'm asked this question, I try to lead with something practical. My encouragement to owners is that they look at their calendar and they find one lunch period a month that they dedicate to their exit. Listen to a podcast, read an article, start learning, start spending some time in this place, go to lunch with a broker or an M&A attorney. I know two that might be qualified to do that. But start spending time on this now. Stop waiting. Stop believing this is something you can do later. Spend a little time on it now. Start to accumulate knowledge, information, start killing some of those dangerous assumptions you have. Watch what happens over time. Change your business, change your approach to this, change your future.
Awesome.
100%. Oh, I agree fully with that. I think that was advice.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us this week on this episode of SaaS Buyers Club. It was a real pleasure having you on the show. And for everyone out there listening to this episode, thanks for joining us as well. As always, I'm your host, Omeed.
And I'm your co-host, Joe.
Gentlemen, a pleasure to be here. Mike Finger with Exit Oasis.
Thank you, Mike.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike.
See everyone next week.